Hello, YouTube. It feels a bit strange to be talking to my computer after a 4-month hiatus from making YouTube videos. I want to discuss the Occupy Wall Street movement, the international Occupy movement in general. My last video was made very shortly after Occupy Wall Street had began in late September, mid to late September. And I still share some of the same critiques and skepticism and some of the same praises that I did 4 months ago, now having gained personal experience with my local Occupy movement. Now, the primary value I see in it is the fact that it does provide an alternative to the dominant culture in terms of the ways that people interact with one another and the community that has been formed and the self-sufficient nature of that community, occupying campus across the country, across the world, ran free kitchens that gave food to homeless people and protesters, relied exclusively on donations, set up their own information tables, got supplies for protesters to stay warm, um, and in essence, operated as a miniature society and community, and continue to do so in some respects. The only barrier to that, as usual, has been the brutality, the unforgivable brutality of the powers that be, of the police departments, um, of the government officials that have ordered the evictions, etc. Um, so it provides evidence that a society can exist without cutthroat competition, without um, coercion, with people gathered together on a purely voluntary basis to work towards their mutual betterment and connection with one another, as opposed to requiring monetary incentives, as is often alleged, in order to be motivated, or threats of being unable to feed your family. And yeah, people have come together on a voluntary basis based on mutual interests to try to create a better world. And I think that's a beautiful thing in itself. I think that if it's ultimately crushed, it will ultimately be for naught, and that the model needs to expand, and the existing paradigm and institutions that sustain it have to be undermined simultaneously. It would be nice if we could just create happy alternatives to the dominant culture, but the fact is that the institutions that prop up the dominant culture are far more powerful than any alternatives right now. That's why we need to strengthen those alternatives and simultaneously work to undermine the existing corrupt, corrosive, restrictive ones that permeate our society. As for critiques of the Occupy movement, I do share the mainstream media's critique, and that is perhaps for different reasons. As much as I hate to say it, I do share that critique of the lack of vision. There are demands. There have been lists of demands. There have been some attempts to specifically attain those demands, actions directed towards the achievement of those demands. However, it has been sorely lacking in terms of a specific methodical means to accomplish the goals that Occupy Wall Street has set out to, and that the various Occupy movements across the nation have attempted to achieve. There has been very little so far in the way of tangible change. There have been the beginnings of tangible change. There have been it certainly has raised awareness, which is an excellent first step. Having said that, it's grossly insufficient, and as as much as I do like the spontaneous, self-evolving, organic nature of the Occupy movement, and would caution against demands that allow the Occupy movement to be co-opted easily and funneled into the electoral process to fuel political campaigns and meaningless reforms. As much as I caution against that, I do think there needs to be goals and ways of achieving said goals. I don't think it can be entirely directionless. That's not to say it's been entirely directionless, but I think it's been far too directionless thus far. I'm hoping for a resurgence in the spring and summer, and I think there's very much that potential. Whether fundamental change will ultimately result, I think, is still entirely in question. The mild changes thus far have been really insignificant from a long-term fundamental societal change standpoint, but the movement is still in its infancy, assuming it continues. So I think that it remains to be seen what will be accomplished. The police brutality has been horrific and insane, all in various cities all across the country and presumably the world, though I've paid less attention to other nations. Um, yeah, the role of the police here is to crush dissent. It is to prevent the Occupy movement from accomplishing fundamental societal change. It is to terrorize people. The police do get off on terrorizing people um, who are simply trying to change society for the better. And it has been, I've witnessed some of this police brutality firsthand. It has been absolutely sickening, and those who rationalize it suffer from syndrome or simply a naive conception of the world and an immoral and a lack of morality and compassion for suffering people. Yes, the police are part of the 99% from a strict economic standpoint, and but that's a very superficial way to look at things. There are neo-Nazis that are part of the 99% from a strict economic standpoint. There are serial killers who are part of the 99%. Frankly, I don't care what your economic status is, how wealthy or poor you are, unless you've obtained that wealth in an explicitly immoral fashion, which granted is the case for numerous wealthy individuals, but I'm not going to make a blanket statement and say all wealthy people are immoral. It's certainly not the case. What I care most about is your political perspectives and what you're doing in terms of advocating for them. If you are, or your political or societal or perspectives or your general morals, etc. If you're a neo-Nazi, I hate you regardless of how rich or poor you are. If you're a cop, I hate you regardless of how rich or poor you are. So if you're a member of the military and are killing innocent Iraqis or really in any way contributing to the perpetuation of immoral imperialist wars, then I oppose you. I'm not going to say I hate every. I don't know. If you're a member of the military, there's no excuse for you. If you're a cop, there's no excuse for you. If you're a neo-Nazi, there's no excuse for you. If you're a serial killer, there's no excuse for you. If you're a rapist, there's no excuse for you. If you're an assaulter or abuser of any kind, there's no excuse for you. And the Occupy movement should be centered around political stances rather than and morality and ways to improve society and the individual and supporting the individuals who, yes, who are suffering economically, certainly, but not at the expense of completely overlooking their morality. In summation, the Occupy movement does have some potential. I do agree with their central messages surrounding corporate greed, surrounding government corruption and injustice, etc. I oppose the state. I oppose all hierarchy. So I think that their critique of most Occupy participants is excessively shallow. But I do still agree with it, and I do think that if we move in the direction that most occupiers would like to move in, that it would create a better society, far from the society I want to see emerge, but certainly a better one. So I do largely agree with a lot of the central messages. I very much like the leaderless structure, even though there are certain individuals who would like to attempt to become leaders, and certainly there have been issues with that in a variety of movements across Occupy movements across the nation. There's people who want their perspectives to have a monopoly on the movement and don't want to recognize the non-hierarchical nature. But nevertheless, I like the non-hierarchical nature. I like the spontaneous nature. I like the creation, the seizing of these public spaces for the common good, for the use of the citizenry who want to accomplish societal change as places where people can brainstorm and form community and become self-sufficient and support one another and attempt to better society and create a microcosm of something resembling the society that I would like to see emerge. I do think it lacks vision. I do think it lacks tangible accomplishments thus far, though the movement is still young. I do think it's very much hindered by the police repression. Obviously. And it's going to be one hell of a fight to accomplish anything fundamental in a society that is so increasingly closed down with an increasingly militarized police force, increasingly callous and careless and cruel city and state officials, federal officials as well. But we will see where it goes, and I'm thrilled that finally there's something that people are is bringing together the few members of society that genuinely care about non-superficial things, and you know. But again, I'm a cynic as well, and numbers wise, it's still an infinitesimal percentage of the populace. You don't need a majority to accomplish fundamental societal change, but you know, like in a lot of the major cities, it's dwindled now to like 200 regular participants or far less, even in the larger cities. Um, at its peak, like Oakland, I know drew 100,000 people for the general strike by some estimates, and that was fantastic. But it was one day. A general strike of one day is not going to accomplish any fundamental societal change. They had a few other marches with in the tens of thousands, I believe. But again, it's still grossly insufficient if you look at the sheer power and the sheer desire to maintain that power and the status quo that those in power have. It's going to be one hell of a fight, and it's going to require a lot of determination and a drastic increase in numbers and for anything fundamental to ultimately change in this sick society that we unfortunately currently live in. That's what I have to say about the Occupy movement. I'm sure I forgot a few things. It's lacked creativity as well. Certainly, it's hard to break out of the mindset that our mundane, routine-oriented culture puts us into. It's hard to even with this unique, entirely new, or not entirely new, but unique and uh, model that's antithetical to the dominant culture, this non-hierarchical decision-making model. Even despite that, it's the General Assemblies still feel very meeting-like, still feel very uninspired in large part. That's not to say there haven't been moments of great creativity and inspiration and community throughout the history of this movement, but it's still caught up in the same thought process and routine oriented structure in large part that permeates every facet of our society, that characterizes our 9 to 5s and our school days and etc. So I'd love to hear your thoughts about the Occupy movement. The reason that I've been less involved in YouTube posting is because my real life has been a little bit more exciting, and YouTube activism, quote unquote, is not real activism, and real activism is a lot more rewarding and a lot more beneficial. So I encourage you all to get involved in your local Occupy movements instead of just posting videos on YouTube, which I suppose is better than nothing, but is not going to fundamentally change society. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, nevertheless, in the comments section. I'd prefer that you actually get involved in the real world. Not that all of you aren't doing so already, but I know there are a lot of YouTube activists, and I was a YouTube activist for far too long. But in any case, let me know your thoughts below. Thanks for listening.